When most people picture ancient biblical prophets, they imagine bearded men giving dusty sermons. But the Book of Ezekiel reads more like a surrealist thriller. We're talking about a man who deployed bizarre street theater, witnessed terrifying cosmic visions, and commanded armies of the undead. To understand why his tactics were so extreme, we have to look at the historical trauma that birthed them. In the 6th century BC, the Babylonian Empire conquered the Israelites, dragging thousands of captives hundreds of miles away from their homeland into forced exile. The exiles were devastated. Their entire religious identity was anchored to the temple in Jerusalem, the literal building where they believed God lived. Stripped of that geography, they were convinced God had entirely abandoned them to their enemies. The nation had hit a wall of absolute despair. Breaking through that kind of psychological trauma required an intervention shocking enough to prove that God was not confined to a single Judean zip code. That intervention arrives in the very first chapter. Out of a massive, violently turbulent storm wind blowing in from the north, Ezekiel witnesses an incomprehensible divine vehicle known as the Merkabah, or the chariot throne. Ezekiel describes a staggering mechanical impossibility. 4 living creatures, each possessing 4 distinct faces pointing in different directions. Beside them are towering, intersecting wheels, completely covered in blinking eyes. Suspended directly above these creatures is a gleaming crystalline platform, and resting on that expanse is a throne made of deep blue sapphire, carrying a radiant, blazing figure the text describes as the likeness of a man. The implication of this bizarre machinery is immediate and profound. God is highly mobile. He is not trapped in a crumbling temple back in Jerusalem. He has mounted a cosmic chariot and ridden directly into enemy territory to confront his captive people. Because the captive Israelites were stubborn and refused to listen to standard verbal warnings, God commissioned Ezekiel as a watchman. He would use visceral, physical street theater to bypass their defenses. For his first performance, Ezekiel takes a clay brick, etches a crude map of Jerusalem onto its surface, and builds miniature siege ramps and battering rams around it, mimicking the tactics of the Babylonian army. The acts quickly escalate into grueling physical endurance. Ezekiel lies completely bound on his side for over a year. During this time, he consumes only highly rationed portions of bread cooked over animal dung, a simulation of the starvation conditions inside a besieged city. Then comes the sword. Ezekiel shaves his head and beard with a literal blade. He burns 1/3, strikes another third, and scatters the rest. A grim, mathematical breakdown of how the population of Jerusalem will be decimated by famine, violence, and exile. These exhausting, dramatic displays forced the exiled community to visually confront an inescapable reality. Jerusalem's destruction was imminent, and it was a direct consequence of their own actions. The warnings eventually materialize. Word reaches the exiles in Babylon that the unthinkable has happened. Jerusalem has fallen, and the sacred temple has been completely destroyed. With the old world completely dead, Ezekiel's agonizing street theater abruptly stops, and in the very same moment, his message violently pivots away from inevitable doom toward an impossible hope. The nation had to experience the absolute rock-bottom consequences of their rebellion before God could cast a new vision. Only a completely dead nation is a candidate for resurrection. This brings us to the most famous chapter in the book. God drops Ezekiel into a vast, desolate wasteland filled with sun-bleached, scattered human bones. It is a striking visual representation of Israel's entirely hopeless state. God commands Ezekiel to prophesy to the dead. As he speaks, a visceral chain reaction begins. The bones rattle and snap together, rapidly growing new sinew, muscle, and skin. Finally, a wind representing the Spirit of God sweeps through the valley and enters the reconstructed bodies. They fill with breath, standing up upon the wasteland as a massive, living army. This vision promises that God will resurrect the nation, replacing their stubborn, stony hearts with hearts of flesh. It moves the focus from their physical survival to a spiritual reconstruction that makes obedience possible. This promise of rebirth culminates in the final chapters of the book, where Ezekiel is transported to a high mountain to view a blueprint for a perfect temple. This architectural schematic focuses on protection. Thick outer walls and restricted gates ensure God's presence remains uncorrupted. Crucially, a miraculous river of life trickles from beneath the altar, flowing east. Defying logic, it rapidly deepens into a massive, uncrossable torrent without any tributaries. This water creates a miraculous transformation. It flows directly into the most desolate, barren, and uninhabitable regions of the world, reversing decay and bringing vibrant, teeming life to places as dead as the Dead Sea coastline. Ezekiel's blueprint actually presents some major logistical problems. It lacks any height measurements for the buildings, and the entire complex is far too large to fit on the actual Temple Mount. These missing details suggest the vision is a prophetic idiom, a symbolic picture of a future where God dwells with humanity permanently. This transition from physical stone to spiritual reality bridges the gap to the later biblical story. The New Testament argues that since Jesus Christ offered a single, perfect sacrifice, the massive altar and animal offerings Ezekiel saw are no longer required. Instead, that visionary river of life finds its fulfillment in the Holy Spirit, which flows from Christ to bring life to all nations. Ezekiel's wild journey shows that no matter how fractured a community becomes, or how dry and scattered their bones get, God's power to forgive and breathe new life is always greater than the decay. The book ends by giving this resurrected city a brand new name, the ultimate triumphs of the entire biblical story. The Lord is there,